A powerful injustice unfolded at 30,000 feet when Jonathan Hale, a successful black CEO, was denied the seat that was rightfully his. The woman claiming it acted with unapologetic entitlement, her actions igniting shock and outrage among everyone present. Yet Jonathan's calm and dignified response turned the tide in an unexpected way, showing true leadership through restraint and principle. But just wait until you hear the shocking twist of this story, and why justice ultimately prevailed. Jonathan Hale moved through the buzzing terminal of JFK with a quiet intensity, carrying the weight of leadership in every step. He was no ordinary traveler. At 42, Jonathan had steered Aerovista to the top of the fiercely competitive aviation industry, shattering financial records and championing diversity initiatives that made global headlines. Yet, as he approached the departure gate for his flight to London, he reminded himself that his greatest achievements couldn't shield him from subtle, everyday challenges, a truth he was about to face head-on. The morning sunlight streamed through vast windows as Jonathan joined the queue. He avoided grand gestures or networking with fellow travelers, intent on preparing for an afternoon meeting in Mayfair that would determine the course of a critical merger. A sense of anticipation tightened his focus. The stakes were immense, and this flight represented more than a crossing of continents. It was, in many ways, a crossing of personal and professional thresholds. As the agent scanned his ticket, Jonathan smiled politely, thinking briefly of his childhood in Atlanta, where flights were an unheard-of luxury. Now first class was not a privilege, but a practicality, a workspace for CEO-level negotiations and late-night strategy sessions. Entering the aircraft, Jonathan was greeted by a wave of cool, filtered air and the soft murmur of executives, celebrities, and frequent flyers. He glanced at the seat assignments and found his place. 2A, a coveted spot at the front, with a panoramic window view and enough space for his laptop and papers. Yet sitting in that seat was a woman he'd never seen. Elegant, composed, wearing a crisp blazer and tapping quietly on her phone. The air seemed charged, as if the moment held more consequence than simple seating logistics. Jonathan cleared his throat, maintaining an aura of professional poise. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat," he said gently. The woman didn't meet his eyes. She bristled, responding as if his presence was an inconvenience. "I think you're mistaken. This is my seat," she replied, not bothering to check her ticket. He produced his own ticket, and a nearby flight attendant confirmed confidently, "Sir, you are assigned 2A. Ma'am, could you please show your boarding pass?" A brief pause filled the cabin with tension. Instead of resolving the situation, the woman dug in her heels. She scanned Jonathan's face, her gaze cool and dismissive. "Is it really necessary to make a scene over a seat?" Her words were calm but carried an edge disbelief, entitlement, and something sharper rising to the surface. Other passengers turned, curiosity piqued. The air shifted from comfortable anonymity to a collective anticipation. Within seconds, smartphones appeared, some tipped to record, others pretending to scroll. The flight crew, trained for technical emergencies rather than social ones, seemed unprepared for what followed. Jonathan tried again, his voice level. "The attendant can help sort this out." She retorted louder. "There's always a fuss, isn't there? People like you always get attention. Maybe try another seat." Her statement drifted through the cabin like a shockwave. Conversations froze, faces stiffened. Jonathan felt heat flush beneath his collar, a vivid physical embarrassment that mingled with anger and a lifetime of learned restraint. For a heartbeat, everything paused. The memories of being excluded, overlooked, judged not by achievement but by skin memories, he kept buried rose to the surface. The flight attendant, now visibly uncomfortable, appealed for cooperation. "Ma'am, please, this is his assigned seat." But the woman only crossed her arms and glared defiantly. Less than 10 minutes into boarding, and the tone had shifted from routine luxury to public reckoning. Jonathan's achievements, authority, and civility were rendered invisible. He saw the skepticism in onlookers' eyes, some sympathetic, some muted with awkwardness, others scanning social media to see if the moment would go viral. For Jonathan, standing there in the aisle, the episode exposed fault lines beneath the surface of modern progress. His mind churned with the consequences. How could he respond with dignity and strength, not only for himself, but for the company, his colleagues, and everyone who might watch this scene unfold? Would his reaction shape public narratives about Aerovista and what it stood for? Could he turn a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for real change, or would it become another silent note of discrimination, lost in the engine noise and cabin chatter? The attendant offered Jonathan another seat, hoping to smooth things over without escalation. Jonathan hesitated, feeling the eyes of every witness, the weight of unsaid expectations. Would giving up his seat mean giving up a principle? He recalled the words of his mentors, the resilience his mother taught him, and the certainty that every choice, especially unplanned ones, could define a legacy. The flight crew grew anxious, the delay now threatening departure time. The captain himself emerged from the cockpit to gauge the situation. With mounting discomfort all around, Jonathan quietly chose not to escalate with anger or accusation. He stepped aside, allowing the crew their measured response. But every moment he stood there, every second of indecision and exposure, burned itself in memory. This was the price of progress, he realized, to meet confrontation on ground familiar and strange, to bear the burden gracefully, and above all, to lead by example, even when no roadmap existed for what came next. The cabin's atmosphere grew heavier with each passing moment. What had begun as a simple seating dispute quickly transformed into the focal point of the entire first-class section, drawing in a silent audience of travelers, each processing the unfolding conflict through their own lens of experience. The woman's refusal to move, her pointed words lingering in the air, sparked a ripple of discomfort that radiated outward from row 2A. Passengers glanced at one another, some exchanging subtle frowns or raising eyebrows, trying to decipher how to respond. A few turned away, uncomfortable with the confrontation, while others watched intently, their curiosity mingling with unease. Social cues, shifted conversations died mid-sentence, headphones slipped off, and more smartphones appeared, some inconspicuously capturing the moment for social media. Others simply gripped tightly as nervous distractions. The cabin crew quietly conferred at the front, concern etched on their faces. They had been trained for turbulence, medical emergencies, even technical issues, but not for the emotional turbulence that now unsettled the entire section. Every flight attendant's attempt to steer the discussion back toward policy or procedure only seemed to stoke the tension. The woman's shoulders squared with defiance. Jonathan's posture remained measured, though the restraint in his voice hinted at a storm beneath the surface. Nearby passengers began to murmur, trying to reconcile what they were witnessing with their expectations of professionalism and courtesy aboard an international flight. Some felt sympathy for Jonathan, recognizing in his silence the dignity of someone who had endured more than his share of slights over the years. A few customers signaled discreet support by nodding or lowering their eyes in solidarity, while others appeared visibly frustrated, hungry for resolution, or simply eager to see the flight depart on time. In the row behind, an older gentleman in a business suit leaned forward, as if ready to intervene, only to hesitate, uncertain of his role. From the adjacent window seat, a young executive exchanged worried looks with the flight crew, quietly questioning whether to lend his own voice. Tension built not just around the central dispute, but across the cabin, threading together a group of strangers in an unspoken shared discomfort. The incident sparked a chain reaction of emotions: indignation among those who bristled at the woman's entitlement, frustration in those craving order and fairness, and a growing sense of collective anger as the boundaries of civility were stretched thin. The presence of cameras and the subtle awareness that this moment could be broadcast to a wider world only heightened the anxiety. Social media, after all, had turned countless anonymous disagreements into viral sensations overnight, igniting debates and fueling calls for accountability. The flight crew, caught between policy and the volatile mood of the cabin, pressed again for a peaceful solution. The woman's reluctance to cooperate became a focal point for passenger resentment, with side conversations beginning to bubble up. a few quietly condemning her stubbornness, others lamenting the uncomfortable delay. Discomfort gave way to frustration, then, for some, to outrage as the perception of unfairness solidified. Amid this swirl of responses, Jonathan stayed remarkably composed, his restraint signaling both discipline and the weight of expectation he bore. He understood that his reaction could become a lesson for the airline, the passengers, and possibly for a far wider public if the story spread beyond that aircraft. The episode was no longer just about a seat. It was about respect, dignity, and the challenge of upholding those values in the most public of spaces, under the scrutiny of dozens of eyes, and soon perhaps millions online. Jonathan sat motionless for several moments, the tension of the cabin pressing on his shoulders like the weight of history. Across the aisle, passengers watched with a mix of quiet anticipation and anxiety, the woman's defiant posture and the crew's careful restraint creating a tableau of modern conflict. Jonathan understood the moment was poised on a razor's edge. A wrong move would mean escalation, but silence would mean surrender. He was no stranger to adversity. Yet here, publicly challenged expectations heavy upon him, he felt every eye measuring his response. He reflected on lessons learned as a young man, striving through boardroom battles, skeptical investors, and closed doors. The wisdom his mother once shared echoed through his mind. True leadership reveals itself when facing adversity with integrity, especially when others look for an example. His heart pounded, but his thoughts were clear. This was not merely about defending a seat, but about standing for something much greater. Raising himself with measured composure, Jonathan captured the cabin's attention with the quiet dignity of someone who knew both the power and cost of restraint. He turned first to the captain and crew, acknowledging their professionalism. "Let's resolve this with respect," he said, his words both a request and a guiding principle. Then Jonathan faced the passengers, his eyes meeting each row. "My name is Jonathan Hale. I lead Aerovista, but I am no more entitled to respect than anyone here. What matters is that every passenger should be treated fairly. What has happened is not just a violation of policy, but of principle." His tone was steady, yet beneath it lay the accumulated resolve of years spent demanding change where others might accept compromise. As he spoke, the woman's shoulders stiffened in momentary resistance, then dropped slightly, her confidence quietly eroding as the tone of the confrontation turned from personal dispute to public reckoning. Jonathan's calm authority began to shift the mood. Passengers leaned in, searching his face for cues, some inspired by his composure, others reminded of times they had faced quiet indignities of their own. The captain nodded, grateful for Jonathan's leadership in establishing calm without the need for escalation or threats. "I could demand action or ask the crew to forcibly remove a passenger," Jonathan continued, addressing the cabin without accusation. "But that is not what progress or true respect looks like. I ask instead that our response reflect the standards we want to see throughout this industry, the standards I fought for as a leader, as a traveler, and as a member of our global community." The crew, strengthened by his words, approached the woman with renewed confidence and empathy, offering her an alternative seat. This time, the woman lingered in indecision, her earlier defiance softening before the collective will and unity of the cabin. She finally stood, her steps less certain than before, moving quietly to the new seat with the reluctant acceptance born not only of policy, but of the realization that the moment was bigger than either of them. As she left the front row, several passengers glanced at Jonathan, acknowledging his stance not through applause but through subtle gestures. A nod, a whispered, "Thank you," a glance of approval. The flight attendant politely welcomed Jonathan into 2A, and as he settled into the seat, the sense of relief was almost palpable. The tension had not vanished, but had transformed, channeled from anger and anxiety into a cautious optimism. Yet Jonathan felt far from triumphant. He knew that what just happened, whether or not it ever reached social media or made it into news headlines, would ripple much further than a single flight. It would become a story scrutinized by both critics and advocates, a template for broader reflection both inside and outside the airline industry. He looked around the cabin, noticing the diversity of travelers, business professionals, families, young students, retired couples. Each likely carried their own memories of struggle, embarrassment, or quiet victory. Each, he realized, could recognize a moment of justice, even if imperfect. Jonathan's mind wandered to all the staff and passengers who had been overlooked, who had suffered in silence when policy or status failed to protect their dignity. As the plane taxied for departure, the mood was no longer combative, but reflective. Passengers whispered quietly, some debating what had happened, others simply grateful for the restoration of peace. Jonathan logged onto his laptop, not to work, but to jot down notes for a message he'd deliver later to his company. A message about why this day proved that extraordinary leadership requires more than expertise and authority. It demands the courage to hold the line for dignity and respect, even when doing so costs energy, reputation, or personal comfort. Above the clouds, as the city receded below, Jonathan felt the weight of his actions settling. He did not defeat a rival, he had preserved a principle. And as he watched the world unfurl beneath the aircraft wings, he hoped that others, wherever they may work or travel, might remember how the quiet strength of one voice could change both a day and a system, reminding everyone that in moments of conflict, the real legacy of leadership is measured by what one chooses to defend and the values left behind for all to follow. The flight continued in a new atmosphere, one of quiet reflection rather than tension. Jonathan, now seated where he belonged, found himself surrounded not just by the hum of the engines, but by the faint sense of solidarity among the cabin's passengers. The applause that had followed the resolution faded into respectful conversation, with nods and glances exchanged between strangers who now felt, however briefly, united by an experience bigger than travel. As news of the incident began to ripple out from the cabin, first through whispered recounting and then onto social media, it quickly drew attention far beyond the confines of Aerovista's first-class section. Passengers shared videos and personal testimonies highlighting not only the prejudice Jonathan had faced, but also his remarkable composure and resolve in diffusing a challenging situation. Soon, online conversations and media outlets picked up the story, framing it not as a spectacle, but as a turning point, a lesson in dignity, resilience, and the changing standards expected from today's aviation leaders. Within hours, executives at Aerovista called emergency meetings. Board members lauded Jonathan's conduct, acknowledging the crucial role his response played in protecting the company's reputation, and in fact, elevating it. Public relations teams crafted official statements emphasizing Aerovista's commitment to inclusivity and non-discrimination. Other airline CEOs weighed in, some privately expressing admiration, and others instructing their own staff to revisit internal policies regarding conflict resolution and diversity. The incident became a case study at industry conferences and in internal corporate trainings. Specialists highlighted Jonathan's calm, the crew's empathy, and the passengers' response as a model for how to address bias and injustice in a public setting without resorting to confrontation or escalation. The positive feedback was overwhelming. Letters of support, messages from advocacy groups, and recognition from global media outlets all confirmed that the airline's brand was now associated not just with luxury and efficiency, but with ethics and strong leadership. Jonathan himself received countless messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers. Some thanked him for his bravery. Others admitted they had never considered how subtle forms of exclusion could persist, even in environments meant for comfort and success. Industry leaders began re-evaluating their own practices, inspired by the tangible impact one moment and one person's principled reaction could have on an entire sector. Even the woman at the heart of the incident reportedly reached out privately, expressing regret for her actions and reflecting on her own biases, furthering the narrative of change and personal growth. Aerovista enacted stronger anti-discrimination policies, improved staff training, and launched new initiatives meant to ensure that respect and fairness became standard for all their passengers. As the journey drew to its end, Jonathan gazed out the window, watching city lights flicker beneath the wings. He felt more than relief. There was a steady, quiet satisfaction in knowing that true change could begin anywhere, even in the tight confines of an airplane cabin. The story became a testament to the power of integrity and a reminder that principled leadership could inspire an entire industry to do better, one conflict and one seat at a time. Chapter 4. After the flight landed, the story of Jonathan's conflict did not remain limited to the few rows of first class. Videos and accounts circulated rapidly across social media, drawing powerful responses from both frequent travelers and aviation professionals. News outlets picked up the scene, framing Jonathan's composed leadership as a lesson for an entire industry, and soon Aerovista's response became the subject of public scrutiny. The company moved quickly, releasing statements that highlighted a renewed focus on equity, calling the event a catalyst for a new phase in internal training and passenger relations. Other CEOs from competing airlines responded publicly, praising Aerovista's approach and acknowledging the need for diversity and accountability industry-wide. Jonathan himself became the figurehead for this change, a symbol of how composure, empathy, and firm action could set a new benchmark in customer service and corporate conduct. Behind closed doors, executives at Aerovista implemented immediate reforms. They strengthened reporting procedures and set up advisory groups to review every discrimination complaint on future flights. Employees were encouraged to come forward, knowing their concerns would be handled with transparency and respect. Advocacy organizations and business partners sent letters of support, while passengers who witnessed the event posted first-person accounts, lauding not just Jonathan's resilience but the company's willingness to address the incident openly. Jonathan received messages of encouragement from all over the world. Colleagues inside and outside the industry recognized his integrity, not because he won a confrontation, but because he restored respect and fairness where it was threatened. The story became a case study at industry seminars, training sessions, and even business schools, a testament to the power of calm leadership and the necessity of defending foundational values, even under pressure. As Jonathan departed the airport, he reflected on the journey, the seat dispute that became a spark, the collective response that elevated the moment, and the changes now unfolding in real time. He realized that real transformation did not start with rules or policies, but with principled choices that inspired others, revived hope, and shaped the future of an industry striving for fairness and respect.